They don't know I'm making this tape. After 40 years of silence, you learn a thing or two about being invisible. You learn which floorboards creak. You learn how to move through your own life like a ghost. If they knew, if the ones who gave me this quiet life and this hollow name suspected for even a second that I was sitting here, in this dusty room, with this cheap recorder, they wouldn't send a team. There wouldn't be a black car pulling up to the curb. It would be quieter than that. A flicker in the power grid. A misplaced step on a staircase. An aneurysm that nobody questions in a man my age. They are masters of silence. But I'm breaking it. I have to. Because the pattern is starting again. I see it in the footnotes of the news. In the coded language of geological survey reports from remote areas. The silence has lasted long enough. And I can hear it starting to fray at the edges. Someone else needs to know the truth before it's buried again under another bland, plausible lie. Someone needs to know what really happened in Silver Creek, West Virginia, back in the winter of 1983. The call came on a Tuesday in early December, when Washington, D.C. was pretending it knew how to handle a real cold snap. The air had a brittle, sharp edge to it. The kind of cold that feels less like weather and more like a physical presence. I was at my desk in the Hoover building, a little cubicle in a forgotten corner of a forgotten department. The Unusual Incidents Unit, the UIU. The rest of the bureau called us the X-Files, before the X-Files was a thing. We were the catch-all for everything that didn't fit into a neat little box. The reports that made career agents look sideways and question the sanity of the reporting party, UFO sightings over restricted airspace, cattle mutilations that defied biological explanation, poltergeist claims from terrified families in new suburban developments. Most of it was swamp gas, weather balloons, undiagnosed mental illness, or elaborate hoaxes. 99.9% of the time, our job was to find the disappointingly mundane explanation, write a report that would satisfy the higher-ups, and file it away in a cabinet nobody ever looked at. But that last fraction of a percent, that was what we lived for. That was the reason the unit still existed, a relic of a more imaginative time in federal law enforcement. My supervisor, a man named Henderson whose entire personality seemed to be composed of lukewarm coffee and quiet disappointment, dropped a thin file on my desk. It didn't thud. It just arrived. A silent little manila rectangle of trouble. He didn't say a word, just tapped the cover and walked away. The file was designated with a simple, uninspired code. Case file 73-Alpha-9er. Inside, the details were sparse, almost clinically so. The town of Silver Creek, an isolated mining community in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, population approximately 612 souls, had gone silent. Completely silent. For 2 weeks. 14 days. No outgoing calls, no incoming calls could connect. The single access road, State Route 93, had been closed by a rock slide a month prior, and the first heavy snows of the season had rendered it impassable even for the state crews. They were cut off. A state police helicopter had done a flyover a few days back. The report was unnervingly simple. No signs of distress, no smoke from chimneys, which was odd given the temperatures, but no visible signs of violence or fire either. Just a town blanketed in snow, looking like a Christmas card. A perfect, silent, still life painting. The local telephone company had run diagnostics. The main trunk line serving the valley was dead. Not cut, not damaged, just dead. No signal. Like someone had unplugged the entire valley from the rest of the world. This wasn't our usual fare. This smelled like a communications failure, a weather-related isolation incident. It should have gone to FEMA, or at the very least a different, more practical corner of the Bureau. but there was a sticky note attached to the inside of the file, written in Henderson's spidery, precise script. It said, "Thorne is heading the field response. He specifically requested you. Wheels up at 1600 Andrews." My stomach tightened. Special agent in charge, Marcus Thorne. Thorne wasn't a man you called for a downed phone line. Thorne was a closer. He was a walking, talking embodiment of federal authority. A man carved from granite and government regulations. He ran the Bureau's Critical Incident Response Group, and he only got involved when things had gone catastrophically, irrevocably wrong, and he had requested me. Me, Frank Keegan, the guy who spent his days debunking ghost stories. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. The sparseness of the file wasn't because of a lack of information. It was because the information they had was being deliberately withheld. The journey began not with a sense of adventure, but with a cold, sinking feeling of dread. We met on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base. The sky was the color of lead, and a bitter wind was whipping across the concrete, carrying the high-pitched whine of jet engines. Thorne was already there, standing by the boarding stairs of a small, unmarked Learjet. He was in his early 50s, with a face that looked like it had been in a lifelong argument with Smiling and had won every round. He wore a heavy black overcoat, but the cold didn't seem to register on him. It was just another environmental factor to be noted and ignored. With him was the third member of our little party, Agent Sarah Jenkins. She was young, maybe 26, a tech specialist out of the Quantico labs. Her job was comms and data analysis, and she looked thoroughly out of her element, her cheeks flushed red from the cold, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and raw nerves. She was clutching a heavy Pelican case that probably held more processing power than the entire town of Silver Creek had ever seen. "Keegan," Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a piece of equipment that had arrived on time. "Good of you to make it?" He nodded towards the jet. "Let's go. We're burning daylight." Inside, the jet was cramped and functional. The seats were worn leather, and the air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. Jenkins immediately started setting up some of her equipment, her fingers flying across keypads and flipping switches. I took a seat across from Thorne. The engines spooled up with a deafening roar, and the world outside became a gray blur. As we ascended, breaking through the low, thick cloud cover into the pale, watery sunlight above, Thorne finally spoke. "You read the preliminary file," he stated, not asked. "As much as there was to read," I replied, my voice sounding thin against the engine noise. "A town's gone off the grid. Phone lines are down, snowed in. Seems straightforward?" Thorne gave a short, humorless laugh that was more of a cough. "Frank, nothing about this is straightforward. That telephone trunk line didn't just fail. According to the Bell Atlantic engineers, it's exhibiting zero capacitance and infinite resistance. In layman's terms, it's not a cut cable. The entire 400-pair copper line, all 22 miles of it from the county exchange to the town's junction box, has ceased to be a conductor of electricity. It's as if the copper itself forgot its own properties. They've never seen anything like it. They called the Pentagon. The Pentagon called us." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. And the flyover? The state police report said no signs of distress. "The first report did," Thorne corrected, his eyes fixed on me. "There was a second flyover yesterday. A military asset, higher resolution imaging. They saw people moving around, walking in the streets. But they noted two things. One, there is still not a single wisp of smoke coming from any chimney in that town. The current ground temperature in that valley is estimated at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind chill well below zero. Two, the people they observed walking outside, they were not wearing coats." I stared at him, the hum of the engine seeming to fade into the background. Not wearing coats? T-shirts, Thorne said, his voice flat. Sweaters. One man was seen shoveling his walk in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, in a blizzard. Frank, the working theory from the people who called us in is not a communications failure. It's some kind of mass hysteria. A cult, an environmental toxin causing neurological breakdown. Or something else. Your job is to be the something else guy. You're my baseline for weird. I need you to look at this situation and tell me if it fits any of the unconventional patterns you've studied. The rest of the flight was silent. Jenkins worked. Thorne stared out the window at the endless carpet of clouds, and I sat with his words echoing in my head. People walking in a blizzard in their shirt sleeves. Copper that had forgotten how to be copper. It was the kind of data point that usually ended up in my files, the detail that made a normal case a UIU case. But this wasn't a single haunted house or a lone eccentric. This was an entire town. 600 people. We landed at a small regional airport in West Virginia, little more than a single strip of asphalt in a corrugated metal shed. The cold here was different, deeper. It felt ancient, seeping up from the frozen ground itself. A black government-issue sedan was waiting for us, engine running, plumes of exhaust billowing into the frigid air. The driver was a state trooper, a big man with a weary face who didn't say a word, just nodded at Thorne and loaded our gear into the trunk. The drive from the airport was a slow descent into another world. The highways gave way to two-lane country roads. The roads gave way to winding mountain passes. The landscape was beautiful and brutal, towering hemlocks and pines laden with snow, their branches drooping under the weight. Jagged rock faces glazed with ice. The sky was a uniform, oppressive gray. We were the only car on the road. An hour into the drive, we passed a gas station. It was the last outpost of civilization. A single flickering fluorescent sign that read, "Gas eats." Thorne told the driver to pull in. "Last chance for hot coffee," he grunted. The place was a time capsule. The smell of gasoline, old wood, and frying bacon hung in the air. An old man with a face like a crumpled map sat behind the counter, watching a tiny black and white television. He looked up as we entered, his eyes lingering on our dark suits and serious faces. Thorne bought us all coffee. It was black, bitter, and scalding hot. As I stood by the counter, trying to warm my frozen fingers on the styrofoam cup, the old man spoke, his voice a dry rustle. "You ain't from around here?" he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "Just passing through." "Ain't no passing through on this road," he rasped, nodding his head towards the window in the direction we were headed. "This road only goes one place. You heading up to Silver Creek?" I glanced at Thorne, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "We have some business up there," I admitted. The old man let out a long, slow breath. "Heard they went quiet," he said, his eyes distant. "It's happened before. Not like this. But it happens. It's the mountain. It gets hungry. My granddaddy used to talk about the silent winters. Comes every 30, 40 years. A winter so cold and so quiet that the sound itself freezes in the air. Said you could hear things in the silence, wrong things, whispers from inside the rock." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. He said in a silent winter, the cold don't just get in your bones, it gets in your head, makes you forget things. Simple things, like the feeling of a fire on your skin. I offered a polite, skeptical smile. Every isolated place had its folklore, its ghost stories to pass the long winter nights. "That's a heck of a story," I said. The old man just stared at me, his gaze unnervingly steady. "It ain't a story, son," he said softly. "It's a warning." Back in the car, the hot coffee felt good in my gut, a small pocket of warmth against the encroaching cold. Jenkins was dismissive. "Local boogeyman stories," she said, tapping on her keyboard. "Statistically, isolated communities have a much higher prevalence of shared folklore, often related to environmental hardships." Thorne was silent, but I could see him watching me in the rearview mirror. I was the folklore expert after all, and I was trying to process what the old man had said, trying to fit it into a neat, rational box. The cold gets in your head, makes you forget the feeling of a fire. It was just a phrase, a piece of mountain poetry. It had to be. We drove on. The road narrowed further, winding upwards. The snowbanks on either side grew taller, forming a white canyon. Then, it happened. Jenkins, who had been monitoring a spectrum analyzer, suddenly sat bolt upright. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp, "we've lost all radio reception. AM, FM, weather band, everything. It's not just static. It's a complete signal dead zone. I'm reading nothing above the noise floor." Thorne grunted. "How far out are we?" "By the map, we should be entering the valley proper in about 2 miles, she said, her voice tight with concern. The dead zone started exactly at the county line marker we just passed. And then her primary device, a state-of-the-art portable spectrum analyzer, let out a piercing squeal and went dark. She tapped it frantically. "Power failure? No. The battery's at 94%. It's just dead. Fried." She looked at Thorne, her professional composure cracking. "Sir, my gear is shielded against electromagnetic pulses. Military-grade shielding. Whatever just happened, it shouldn't be possible." A heavy silence fell over the car. The only sound was the crunch of the tires on the snow and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. The first real data point. The first undeniable sign that the rules were different here. I looked out the window. We had rounded a final, sharp bend, and there it was. Down in the valley below, nestled in a bowl of snow-dusted mountains, was the town of Silver Creek. A light snow was falling, thick, silent flakes drifting down from the gray sky. It looked exactly like the pictures, a postcard from a forgotten America. At the entrance to the town, a wooden, hand-carved sign, half buried in a drift, read, "Welcome to Silver Creek, population 612. The gates, if there ever were any, were gone. The road ahead was clear, a dark ribbon cutting through the pristine white. There were no tire tracks, no footprints. The entire town was waiting for us, and it felt like it had been holding its breath for a very long time. We drove into Silver Creek like we were entering a photograph. The silence was the first thing that truly hit me. It was a physical presence, a weight on my eardrums. In the city, there's always a background hum, a baseline of noise you don't even notice until it's gone. Here, there was nothing. No distant traffic, no barking dogs, no children shouting. Not even the wind seemed to make a sound as it moved through the heavy-laden pine trees. The only sound was the low grumble of our car's engine, and it felt like a profanity, a vulgar intrusion into a sacred quiet. We parked in front of the sheriff's office, a small, unassuming brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and hadn't been updated since. Thorne killed the engine, and the silence rushed in, absolute and profound. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just sat there, encased in our bubble of Detroit steel and glass, staring out at the frozen tableau. "All right," Thorne said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Jenkins, stay with the vehicle. Try to get a hardline connection from the comms equipment in the sheriff's office. See if you can raise anyone at all. If the landlines are dead, use the sat uplink. Don't leave the car for any reason until I say so. Keegan, you're with me. Standard 2-man cell procedure. We're going to make contact. Sidearms visible, but holstered. No long guns. We're here to observe, not intimidate. Stepping out of the car was like stepping into a different dimension. The cold was shocking. A dry, biting cold that went straight through my wool coat and into my bones. I could feel the moisture in my nostrils freezing with every breath. My lungs ached. I pulled my collar up higher, my breath pluming in front of me in a thick white cloud. Thorne seemed unaffected, his face a mask of grim determination. We walked up the snow-covered steps of the sheriff's office. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was just as cold as it was outside, if not colder. The office was empty. A fine layer of frost covered every surface, the metal desk, the filing cabinets, the dial-up telephone. A calendar on the wall was turned to November, a picture of a golden autumn landscape above the grid of dates. The last day crossed off was a Tuesday, 2.5 weeks ago. On the desk, a mug of coffee sat next to a stack of paperwork. I reached out a gloved finger and touched the mug. It was ice cold. A thick skin of mold was growing on the surface of the dark liquid. "Place is a tomb," Thorne muttered, his eyes scanning every corner. "Check the back." I moved through a short hallway into a small room with 2 holding cells. They were both empty, the doors hanging open. Everything was neat, orderly, and frozen. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of panic. It was as if the sheriff had simply stood up from his desk one afternoon and walked away, leaving his coffee to freeze. We went back outside. The snow was still falling, each flake a perfect, complex crystal that settled without a sound. It was then that we saw the first resident. A man was walking down the middle of the main street heading in our direction. He was in his late 40s or early 50s with thinning gray hair and a paunch that strained against the fabric of his shirt. A thin, short-sleeved, brightly colored Hawaiian shirt. He was also wearing khaki shorts and a pair of worn-out sandals on his bare feet. He was moving slowly, with a strange, lethargic gait, his arms swinging loosely at his sides. He didn't seem to notice the snow collecting on his bare shoulders, or the fact that his exposed skin was turning a blotchy, alarming shade of red and purple. He was humming to himself, a tuneless, repetitive little melody. As he got closer, I could see his face. His expression was placid, almost blissfully vacant. His lips were blue. Thorne held up a hand, a universal gesture to stop. The man stopped, his humming trailing off. He looked at us, his eyes unfocused. "Afternoon," he said, his speech slow and slightly slurred, the words puffing out in a thick cloud of condensation. "Good afternoon, sir," Thorne said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm Special Agent Thorne with the FBI. This is Agent Keegan. We're here to check on the town. We heard the phone lines were down." The man blinked slowly as if processing the words through a thick fog. "Phone lines?" he repeated. "Oh, yeah. Haven't worked in a while. Don't much need 'em though. Quiet is nice." He smiled, a slow, lazy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I could see a patch of white, waxy-looking skin on the tip of his nose. Frostbite. Severe frostbite. And he was completely unaware of it. "Sir, aren't you cold?" I asked, the question feeling absurdly inadequate. He looked down at his Hawaiian shirt, then back at us, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Cold?" he said, as if the word was foreign to him. No, I don't think so. A little buzzy, maybe. The air. It's been buzzing for a few weeks now. Makes your teeth ache a bit. But it's not cold." He shivered, a violent, full-bodied tremor that shook his frame. He looked down at his own trembling arms with a detached curiosity. "Funny," he mumbled. "Got the shivers? Must be coming down with something?" Thorne and I exchanged a look. It was a glance that contained a novel's worth of horror and disbelief. "Sir, what's your name?" Thorne asked, taking a step closer. "Merton," the man said. "Merton Finney. I run the hardware store. He gestured vaguely down the street. "Just heading home for lunch?" "Mr. Finney," Thorne said, his voice firm but gentle. "You need to get inside and get warm. You're not dressed for this weather. It's dangerously cold out here." Merton looked at Thorne's heavy coat, then at my own parka, as if seeing them for the first time. "You fellas are bundled up something fierce," he observed, a note of mild amusement in his slurred voice. "Must be from down south." He shivered again, another convulsive spasm. "Well, nice talking to you." He turned and continued his slow, shuffling walk down the street, leaving a trail of bare footprints in the fresh snow. We watched him go until he turned a corner and disappeared. "Jesus Christ," I breathed, the words turning to ice in the air. He has no idea. He can't feel it. He's freezing to death and he can't feel it. Thorne was grim. He complained about a buzzing, he said, more to himself than to me. "Let's check a house. We need to see how they're living." We chose a small blue-sided house at random. The front door had a cheerful Christmas wreath on it. Like the sheriff's office, the door was unlocked. We announced ourselves loudly. "FBI, is anyone home?" We stepped inside. The wave of cold that hit us was even more intense than outside. It was the deep, penetrating cold of a walk-in freezer. The windows were opaque with thick, feathery frost on the inside. In the living room, a woman sat in an armchair, staring at a television that was turned off. She was wearing a thin summer dress. Her legs were bare, and her feet were propped up on a hassock. Her skin was a horrifying mosaic of blue and gray. She was knitting, her fingers moving with a slow, clumsy deliberation. An elderly man, presumably her husband, sat on the couch reading a newspaper. He wore a polo shirt and slacks. "Ma'am." "Sir?" Thorne said, his voice echoing in the frigid silence of the house. The woman looked up, her movements languid. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice a soft, breathy whisper. "Didn't hear you come in." She didn't seem alarmed or surprised to see two strange men in heavy winter gear standing in her living room. "We're with the FBI, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just checking on everyone." My eyes fell on the thermostat on the wall. It was a classic Honeywell round model. The needle was pointed all the way to the left, at 50 degrees. The heating system was off. Every radiator I could see was stone cold. "Ma'am, your house it's very cold in here. Is your furnace broken?" The woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor, looked around the room with a vague, pleasant expression. "Broken? I don't think so. We turned it off a few weeks back. It just got so stuffy in here. And the noise, the clanking of the pipes, it was getting in the way of the buzzing." There it was again. The buzzing. "The buzzing?" I prompted. Her husband, Walter, lowered his newspaper. His face was gaunt. His skin had a pale, waxy sheen. "It started a while ago," he said, his voice weak and reedy. A low hum. "In the air, in the ground. Gets louder every day. It's not a bad sound, really. Just constant. Makes it hard to concentrate on anything else. Makes everything else seem distant." He coughed, a dry, shallow sound. "We were just about to have some iced tea. Would you gentlemen care for a glass?" I looked at the pitcher of tea on the coffee table. A thick layer of ice had formed on the top. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a cult. It wasn't mass hysteria in the traditional sense. This was something else entirely. A profound neurological event. A collective sensory disconnect on a scale I couldn't begin to comprehend. These people were living in meat lockers they called homes. Their bodies were shutting down from extreme hypothermia, and their only complaint was a persistent, annoying buzz. Thorne was already backing out of the room. "Thank you for your time, ma'am, sir. We have to keep moving." We stepped back out into the snow, pulling the door shut behind us. The air outside, which had felt dangerously cold only minutes before, now felt almost mild by comparison. My mind was reeling, trying to find a box to put this in. Toxin. A chemical agent in the water supply. Some kind of psychoacoustic weapon being tested. Nothing fit. The sheer placidity of the victims was the most terrifying part. There was no panic, no fear, just a slow, gentle, and oblivious slide into a frozen death. We walked back to the car in silence. Jenkins was waiting, her face pale. "I can't raise anyone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The landline is as dead as they said, and the satellite uplink, it's not working. I'm getting a signal lock. The dish is oriented perfectly, but the data packets are just vanishing. They're not being rejected. They're not bouncing back. They're leaving my transmitter and just ceasing to exist. It's like trying to shout into a vacuum." Thorne leaned against the side of the car, his breath coming out in ragged white puffs. He looked older than he had on the tarmac at Andrews. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a terrible understanding. "Keegan," he said, his voice low and heavy. "This isn't a case file. This is a quarantine scenario. The mystery isn't what happened to the town. The mystery is what the hell is happening to it right now. And we're standing in the middle of it." The snow kept falling, blanketing the silent houses, the empty streets, and the footprints of the man in the Hawaiian shirt, slowly erasing the only evidence that he had ever been there at all. That first night in Silver Creek is seared into my memory like a brand. We established a makeshift command post in the sheriff's office. It was the most logical choice. It was central, defensible, and had its own generator. Thorne found it in a back storage room, a beast of a diesel generator that probably hadn't been started in a decade. After a solid half hour of cursing and wrestling with the pull cord, it coughed to life with a deafening, stuttering roar. The sound was a violation of the town's profound silence, but it was also the sound of survival. The lights flickered on, a weak, buzzing yellow glow that cast long, dancing shadows across the frosted windows. We had power, but we didn't dare use the building's heating system. We had no idea if the furnace or the vents were contaminated with whatever was causing this. Instead, we relied on our own gear, high-powered electric space heaters that we plugged into the generator. They glowed a fierce, cherry red, and we huddled around them like primitive men around a fire, the only pockets of warmth in a universe of deepening cold. For dinner, we broke out the MRE's meals, ready to eat, the culinary nadir of government service. I chose the Chili Mac. I tore open the pouch, slid the chemical heater inside, and waited for it to warm up. The smell, a synthetic, vaguely tomato-like aroma, filled our small, cold space. I took my first bite. It was nothing. I blinked. I took another, larger spoonful. I could feel the texture, the mushy pasta, the slightly grainy texture of the meat substance, but there was no flavor. None at all. It was like chewing on warm, wet cardboard. "Thorne," I said, my voice quiet, "taste your food?" He was eating something that purported to be beef stew. He paused, a spoonful halfway to his mouth. He took a slow, deliberate bite, chewed for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Nothing?" he said. He tried again. "Absolutely nothing. It's just texture and temperature." Jenkins, who had been trying to coax her equipment back to life, looked up. "My coffee," she said, her voice thin. She held up her thermos. "I made it this morning at the airport. It's my favorite blend. Dark roast. I just took a sip, and it tastes like hot water. I thought I'd forgotten to put the grounds in the machine, but I know I did." A cold dread, colder than anything the West Virginia winter could produce, began to creep up my spine. It was starting. Whatever it was starting with us. the loss of taste, a subtle, insidious corruption of the senses. I looked at the chili mac in my tray. It suddenly seemed alien, hostile. I couldn't eat another bite. We sat there in the flickering light of the heaters, the roar of the generator filling the silence, and we understood. The phenomenon wasn't just in the townspeople. It was in the air. It was in the ground, and we were breathing it. As darkness fell, a deep, impenetrable blackness that swallowed the snow-covered landscape, Thorne made a decision. We needed more data. We had to understand the scope of the delusion. We suited up again. The ritual of zipping up parkas and pulling on gloves, feeling like we were donning armor for a battle against an invisible enemy. We chose another house, this one on the edge of town, near a stand of dark pine trees. This time, we saw lights in the windows. Not the warm yellow light of lamps, but the flickering, dancing light of an open fire. Hope, a stupid, foolish hope, flickered in my chest. Maybe this family was different. Maybe they still understood the cold. We approached cautiously. Through the large picture window, we could see a family, a man, a woman, and 2 young children, huddled together on the floor in the middle of their living room. They were gathered around a small makeshift fire pit built out of bricks on their hardwood floor. But the fire was out. There was a pile of charred logs and gray ash, but no flames, no glow, not even a wisp of smoke. Yet they were all staring into the cold, dead hearth as if it were a roaring bonfire, their hands outstretched towards it, seeking a warmth that wasn't there. They were all shivering. The children's teeth were chattering audibly, a sound that cut through the silence like tiny hammers. They were all dressed in pajamas, thin cotton garments completely inadequate for the sub-zero temperatures inside the house. We knocked, and the man, his name was David, came to the door. He was young, maybe 35. His face was pale and his lips were a dark, unhealthy blue. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice shaking from the shivers that racked his body. "Sir, we're with the FBI," Thorne said, his voice gentle. "We saw your fire. We just wanted to make sure you were all right." David looked back at the dead fire pit, a look of confusion on his face. "Oh, the fire," he said. "Yeah, it's not working right tonight. It's putting out a lot of light, but no heat. Funny thing," he rubbed his arms vigorously. "Can't seem to shake these darn shivers. Must be the flu. The whole town's got it, seems like." My God, the cognitive dissonance was absolute. They were hallucinating the fire, or, more accurately, they were remembering what a fire was supposed to look like, what it was supposed to do, and their minds were filling in the blanks. They knew they were supposed to be warm, so they huddled around a symbol of warmth, unable to process the sensory data that told them it was a lie. They could feel their own bodies shaking, but they had lost the ability to connect the shivering to the concept of being cold. They attributed it to sickness, the only logical explanation their broken perception could offer. "What about the buzzing?" I asked him. "Do you hear it?" His eyes lit up with a flicker of recognition. "The buzzing?" "Yes. It's awful tonight, isn't it? So loud, right behind the eyes. My wife, Sarah, she says it makes her dizzy." He turned and called back into the frigid room. "Honey, these men hear the buzzing too." The woman, Sarah, just nodded weakly from her spot by the cold ashes, pulling a shivering little girl closer to her. The girl was maybe 6 years old. Her skin had a terrifying, translucent quality. I couldn't bear to look at her. It was my own personal ghost, the memory from that hostage situation years ago, made real and immediate. A child in danger, and I was helpless to explain the nature of the threat. How do you save someone from their own senses? We made our excuses and left, retreating back into the sterile safety of the sheriff's office. The horror of what we had just seen settled over us, a thick, suffocating blanket. These people weren't just dying. They were being erased, sense by sense. Their reality was being hollowed out from the inside, leaving only a confused, shivering shell. "This is a biological event," Jenkins said, her voice a strained whisper. She was running diagnostics on a sample of snow I had collected, using a portable microscope. "I'm not a biologist, but look at this." She turned the screen of her laptop towards us. The ice crystals in the snow. They're not normal. A normal snowflake is hexagonal, a dendritic crystal. These are different. The crystalline structure is wrong. It's too perfect, too uniform. And there's something else. Microscopic inclusions. Not dust, not pollutants. They look organic, almost like spores, but they don't match any known fungus or bacterium in the databases. Thorne stared at the screen. A microorganism? Something airborne that affects the neurological pathways for sensory perception? "It's the only theory that fits," Jenkins said. "It would explain the progression. It starts with a minor symptom, the buzzing, maybe the sound of the organism interacting with the auditory nerve. Then it attacks the olfactory and gustatory senses, loss of taste and smell. And its final stage, its primary function, is to knock out the brain's ability to process temperature and pain. It's diabolically efficient. It makes its host incapable of seeking warmth or shelter, so they succumb to the elements. And the organism can, what, feed? Reproduce in the frozen tissue? I don't know. A terrifying thought occurred to me. "The phone line," I said. "The copper line that stopped being a conductor. What if this thing doesn't just affect organic matter? What if it affects things on a fundamental physical level? What if it's not a biological organism, but some kind of field? A resonance field that disrupts normal neurological and even quantum functions?" I was rambling, pulling at threads from the most obscure and speculative UIU files. Project Stargate, remote viewing, psychotronics. The things we weren't supposed to talk about even within the unit. Thorne held up a hand. "Stop. We're getting ahead of ourselves. We have two working hypotheses. A biological agent or an unknown energy field. Either way, we are dangerously exposed. From this moment on, we operate under full quarantine protocol. We eat only our own sealed food. We drink only our own bottled water. No more contact with the residents unless absolutely necessary. We need to find the source." "Jenkins, what's the last thing you have in your database about this valley?" Jenkins's fingers flew across her keyboard. "It's a coal town. Or it was. The main mine, the Blackwood Consolidated Mine, played out in the late 70s. There was a smaller, more recent operation. A geological survey company, OmniGeo, was doing some exploratory drilling up on the ridge, looking for rare earth metals. They shut down their operation about 6 weeks ago, right before the first snow. That's the last major activity in the area." "And the town doctor?" I asked. "If this started as a flu, he would have been the first to see it. He'd have records." Thorne nodded, a new sense of purpose in his eyes. "That's our next move. At first light, we go to the doctor's office. His records could be the key. They could tell us how this started and who patient zero was." He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze hard. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we find answers." But sleep was impossible. I lay on a hard bench, wrapped in my sleeping bag, but my mind was racing. I could hear the constant roar of the generator, the hum of the space heaters, and underneath it all, I thought I could hear something else. A low, faint hum, the buzzing. I told myself it was just the generator, just the electronics. It was psychological, suggestion. But as I closed my eyes, the image of that little girl, shivering in front of a dead fire, her skin turning blue, burned in my mind. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside the room. It was inside our food. And it was beginning to creep into the corners of our minds. The first night was over, but the true darkness was just beginning to fall. The dawn, when it came, was not a sunrise. It was a slow, reluctant dilution of the darkness, the world shifting from impenetrable black to 1,000 shades of oppressive gray. The snow had stopped falling, and an eerie stillness had settled over the valley. The generator was still roaring, a defiant heartbeat in a dead town. None of us had slept well. The circles under Jenkins's eyes were darker, and Thorne's face seemed to have new lines etched into it overnight. The loss of taste had a profoundly unsettling psychological effect. Eating became a chore, a mechanical act of fueling the body without any of the associated pleasure or ritual. It made us feel disconnected from ourselves, one step closer to the placid, vacant state of the townspeople. Our objective for the day was clear. Find the office of the town doctor, a man named Alistair Finch. According to the town directory we'd found in the sheriff's office, his clinic was on a side street, not far from the main square. We geared up in silence, the routine of zipping zippers and checking our equipment, a small comfort in a world where the fundamental rules no longer applied. Stepping outside was the same shock as the day before. The cold was a physical blow, but today, it felt different. Or rather, my perception of it felt different. I could still register it as cold intellectually. I knew the temperature was dangerously low, but the sharp, painful bite was duller, muted, like listening to a scream from behind a thick glass wall. I didn't say anything to Thorne or Jenkins. To admit it would be to admit that I was succumbing, that the invisible tide was washing over me too. The doctor's office was a small, white, clapboard building with a simple sign out front. Dr. Alistair Finch, Family Practice. The windows were dark and frosted over. The front door was, like every other door in Silver Creek, unlocked. Thorne pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The wave of cold that met us was familiar now, but the smell was new. It was the faint, cloying scent of sickness and antiseptic, a ghost of a smell that seemed to hang in the frozen air. The waiting room was neat and tidy. A few old magazines sat fanned out on a coffee table, their pages stiff with the cold. But the door leading to the examination rooms was ajar, and from beyond it, we could see chaos. The inner office was a disaster. It looked like it had been hit by a localized hurricane. Papers were everywhere, strewn across the floor, overflowing from filing cabinets that had been pulled open and left that way. Medical charts, patient files, prescription pads, a blizzard of paper frozen in mid-explosion. Chairs were overturned. A microscope lay on its side on a countertop. It wasn't the work of a looter. It was the work of a man in a desperate, frantic search for an answer. This was the office of a man who had seen the apocalypse coming and had tried with every fiber of his being to understand it. "My God," Jenkins whispered, stepping carefully through the debris. "What happened here?" "A mind at the end of its rope," Thorne said, his eyes scanning the room. He knew. He was the first one to know. He saw the symptoms, he saw the pattern, and it drove him mad. We began to search, methodically at first, then with a growing sense of urgency. We were looking for a summary, a report, a final note, something that would give us a shortcut through the mountain of raw data scattered at our feet. Jenkins started trying to sort the patient files, looking for a chronological progression. Thorne was checking the desk, pulling open drawers. I was drawn to the floor. It felt like the answer had to be here, somewhere in the heart of the chaos. I started sifting through the papers, my gloved fingers clumsy. The files told a chilling story, even in their disarray. I saw chart after chart for residents we had already met. Merton Finney, the man in the Hawaiian shirt. His file noted a visit 3 weeks ago. Chief complaint: tinnitus, a persistent low-frequency hum. Patient reports feeling out of sorts. A week later, another entry. Patient reports loss of taste and smell. Seems disoriented. No fever. Then, nothing. The file for Eleanor, the woman from the cold house, was similar. Headaches, dizziness, complains of a buzzing sound. Then, a week later, anosmia and ageusia. The technical terms for loss of smell and taste. Dr. Finch had been tracking it. He had been identifying it. "I've got something," Thorne said from across the room. He was holding a small black microcassette recorder, the kind doctors used for dictation. He pressed the play button. A voice, thin and reedy with exhaustion and fear, filled the cold air. It was Dr. Finch. October 28th. The symptoms are accelerating. What began as a curiosity, a shared auditory hallucination, has become a full-blown epidemic. 15 new cases today alone. The presentation is frighteningly consistent. Stage 1, the auditory phenomenon, the buzzing as they call it. Stage 2, approximately 4 to 6 days later, complete loss of gustatory and olfactory function. Stage 3, God help me. Stage 3 is where it reveals its true nature. I saw Walter Prentice today. Came in complaining of a terrible sunburn on his hands. He'd been working on his car engine all morning. His hands weren't sunburned. They had 2nd and 3rd degree thermal burns. He couldn't feel them. He simply noticed the blistering. I tested him. Applied an ice pack directly to his skin. No reaction. None. The mechanism for perceiving temperature, both hot and cold, has been deleted. The tape clicked off. We stood in silence, the doctor's terrified voice still hanging in the air. This was it. The confirmation. The progression. He was onto it, Jenkins said, her voice awed. He was figuring it out. "Keep looking," Thorne commanded. "There has to be more." We redoubled our efforts. The feeling of being on the verge of a breakthrough was a powerful motivator. And then, I found it. It wasn't on the desk, or in a filing cabinet. It was hidden. Underneath an overturned examination table, a single floorboard looked slightly askew. I knelt down, pried at it with the tip of my knife, and it came up. In the small dark space beneath, there was a thick, leather-bound ledger, a personal journal. I pulled it out. The leather was cold and stiff. I opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was ragged, almost illegible, the frantic scrawl of a man whose mind was coming apart. "November 15th, I read aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "It has me now. I can feel it. The buzzing is a roar. The world has no taste, no smell. It is a cardboard world. I checked my own temperature an hour ago. 94.2 degrees. My body is failing, but I'm not cold. I feel nothing. This is my last lucid entry. My research. It's all for nothing. The patient histories, the cellular samples, they all point to a symptom, not a cause. But I think I know the source. It's not in the water. It's not in the air. Not really. It's coming from the mountain. The OmniGeo survey team. They weren't looking for rare earth metals. That was a cover. I found one of their core sample manifests. It was full of geological nonsense, codes, but one word was circled over and over again in the margins of their drilling logs. A project name, I think. A name that makes no sense and all the sense in the world. Wintermute. The name hit me like a physical blow. Wintermute. It sounded like something from a spy novel, a Cold War nightmare project. It was the key, the source. The OmniGeo team, Thorne said, his voice grim. They didn't just leave. They fled. They must have drilled into something, released something. This, Wintermute. Jenkins was already at the laptop she had brought with her. I'm trying to cross-reference the name. OmniGeo, Wintermute. It's not in any of the public corporate registries. It's not a standard project codename in the DARPA or DoD databases I have access to. She stopped, her eyes widening. Wait a minute. There's a ghost file? A deeply encrypted, triple firewalled file fragment in the Department of Energy's deep archive. The file is corrupted. It's just a tag. But the tag is Project Wintermute. It's linked to a geological survey operation in the Appalachian region, terminated in 1983. The reason for termination is classified at a level I can't even get a name for. It's so far above my clearance it might as well be on the moon. We had it. The thread. The name. The place. Project Wintermute. It was real. A secret government project run under the cover of a private corporation that had gone horribly, apocalyptically wrong. They had unleashed a phenomenon that could rewrite human sensory perception and had simply walked away, leaving 600 people to freeze to death in the silent, buzzing cold. As we stood there, in the wreckage of Dr. Finch's desperate last stand, a new sound began. The buzzing. It wasn't in my head anymore. I could hear it in the room. A low, resonant hum, like a massive transformer had just been switched on deep in the earth beneath us. It grew steadily in volume, making the loose papers on the floor vibrate. It was no longer a symptom. It was a presence. It knew we were there. It knew we had found its name, and it was getting closer. The hunt was over. We had found the monster's name, and now, I think, the monster was coming to hunt us. The hours that followed the discovery of Dr. Finch's journal were a blur of rising tension and creeping dread. The journal was our Rosetta Stone, our key to the madness of Silver Creek. We retreated to the relative fortress of the sheriff's office. The generator's roar, a comforting, if deafening, shield against the encroaching silence. We spread the doctor's frantic notes in his final journal across the cold metal desk, the pages like sacred texts in the stark, yellow light of the portable lamps. Thorne, Jenkins, and I pored over them, reading passages aloud, trying to assemble a coherent timeline, a chain of events that could lead from a geological survey to this sensory apocalypse. The journal was a descent into hell, chronicled with the detached, methodical precision of a scientist watching his own world dissolve. I read a passage aloud, my voice a low monotone against the hum of the generator. November 3rd. Patient, 12-year-old Lily McGregor. Her mother brought her in, said the girl was acting funny, refused to eat her favorite candy, said it tasted like paper, complained that the bees were in her head. I examined her. Vitals appear normal, but her affect is flat, her responses delayed. I asked her to describe the buzzing. She said it wasn't like bees. It was like the sound a television makes late at night when the shows are over. The snow sound. A sound with no source and no meaning. A sound that eats all the other sounds. Jenkins shuddered, rubbing her arms. The snow sound, she whispered. Static. White noise. It's not just a hum. It's a signal. A signal that's overriding their own neural signals. Thorne pointed to another entry in the journal. Here, November 10th. Finch writes about the Omni-Geo team. They all left in a single night, just packed up their equipment and were gone by morning. The foreman, a man named Henderson, stopped by my office 2 days before they vanished. He looked ill, pale, shaking. He paid for his entire crew's bar tab at the Rusty Pickaxe, a bill that had been running for 2 months. Paid in cash. Told the bartender, Marjorie, that they'd hit something they weren't supposed to, and that the company was pulling the plug. He told her she and everyone else should get out of the valley before the first snow. Nobody listened, of course. This is their home. Where would they go? They were warned. A clumsy, half-drunk warning from a terrified foreman, but a warning nonetheless. Project Wintermute wasn't just an accident. It was an accident they knew had happened. They ran, and they sealed the door behind them, leaving the people of Silver Creek to their fate. The malevolence of it, the sheer bureaucratic cruelty, was staggering. As we worked, the world outside grew darker. The gray afternoon bled into a deep, starless twilight, and the buzzing intensified. It was no longer a subtle, subjective hum I could dismiss as psychological. It was a tangible, physical vibration. It was in the floorboards, in the metal of the desk, in the fillings in my teeth. It had a frequency that seemed designed to unnerve, to bypass the ears and resonate directly with the human skull. Jenkins had to shout to be heard over it. "The frequency is modulating!" she yelled, pointing at a small, handheld oscilloscope she'd managed to get working. A jagged, erratic sine wave danced across the tiny green screen. "It's not a constant tone. It's shifting. It's almost like a code, but it's not binary. It's chaotic." The psychological toll was immense. The constant, invasive sound frayed our nerves, making concentration difficult and rational thought a struggle, and the sensory deprivation was worsening. My bottle of water tasted of nothing. An energy bar I tried to force down was a tasteless, chalky brick in my mouth. My world was being bleached of flavor, but it was the cold that was the most insidious. I knew, intellectually, that the temperature in the room was hovering just above freezing, despite our heaters. But the sensation of cold was becoming an abstract concept. I could see my breath pluming. I could see the frost on the windows, but the feeling on my skin was muted. A distant pressure rather than a sharp, biting pain. I found myself unzipping my parka, feeling stuffy. Thorne noticed. "Keegan." "Zip up your coat," he ordered, his voice sharp. I looked down and saw my jacket was half open. I hadn't even realized I'd done it. I zipped it back up, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick. A wave of fear, cold and pure, washed over me. It was happening to me, just like the doctor's journal described. Then, the true psychological war began. It started subtly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement near the frosted-over windows of the office. I turned my head, but there was nothing there. Just the swirling patterns of ice. I dismissed it. My eyes were tired, strained from reading in the poor light. A few minutes later, I heard a sound buried deep beneath the roar of the generator and the all-pervasive buzzing. It was a whisper, a soft, feminine whisper, and it seemed to say my name. "Frank?" I froze. Thorne and Jenkins were deep in a discussion about radio frequencies. They hadn't heard it. It was for me. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Thorne looked up. "Hear what? All I can hear is this goddamn hum." I let it go. It had to be an auditory hallucination, a side effect of the buzzing, my brain trying to find a pattern in the chaos. But then it happened again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was the faint, unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. A little girl. And it wasn't just a sound. It was a memory. A sound I had spent years trying to forget. The sound of the hostage, the little girl named Emily, from the bank robbery in Baltimore that had ended my career as a field agent. The situation I had misread. The situation where she had died. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a random hallucination. This was specific. This was personal. Whatever this Wintermute phenomenon was, it wasn't just a blind, dumb force. It was intelligent. It was in my head. It was sifting through my memories, finding my deepest traumas, and it was weaponizing them against me. It was a new level of terror. The thing wasn't just trying to kill us. It was trying to break us first. I stood up, needing to move, to escape the confines of the office and the memories that were beginning to bleed into reality. I walked to the heavily frosted window that looked out onto the main street. I rubbed a small circle clear with my glove, peering out into the oppressive darkness. The street was empty, bathed in the cold, dead light of a partial moon. And then I saw him. A figure, standing motionless in the middle of the street, about 50 yards away. It was a man, but he was wrong. He was tall, unnaturally so, his limbs long and thin, like a spider's. He was wearing what looked like the tattered remains of a geological survey uniform. He was just standing there, his head tilted at an impossible angle as if listening to something deep within the earth. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. Was he one of the Omni-Geo team, left behind? Or was he a townsperson, his body twisted by the phenomenon? Or was he a hallucination, a projection of my own mounting fear? As I watched, he slowly raised one long, thin arm and pointed directly at the sheriff's office, directly at me. And then he dissolved. He didn't walk away. He just fell apart, like a column of smoke in a strong wind, vanishing into the darkness. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. There was someone outside, I gasped. A man. He pointed at us. Thorne and Jenkins rushed to the window, but there was nothing there, just the empty, snow-covered street. "Keegan, get a grip," Thorne said, his voice hard, but his eyes were filled with a new kind of fear. The fear that his own men were starting to break. "I'm not crazy," I insisted, my voice shaking. "I saw him. It's playing with us. It knows we're here, and it's trying to scare us." The buzzing in the room seemed to swell in response, the frequency shifting, becoming higher pitched, more agitated. It was the sound of a predator that had been spotted, a predator that was done with stealth. The lights in the office flickered violently, then went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. The only light was the faint, ghostly green glow of Jenkins's oscilloscope. The generator hadn't died. I could still hear its roar outside. Something had deliberately cut the power inside the building. A new sound joined the chorus, a scratching sound. It was coming from the front door of the sheriff's office, a slow, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails or something harder, being dragged down the thick wood of the door. Scratch, scrape, pause, scratch, scrape, pause. We were trapped. The thing from the mine, the Wintermute phenomenon, the ghost in the machine. It was outside, and it wanted in. The psychological war was over. The siege had begun. The darkness that enveloped us was absolute, a thick, smothering blanket that erased the world. The sudden failure of the lights was a visceral shock, stripping away our last illusion of control. For a terrifying second, the only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart and the high, whining buzz that seemed to be boring its way directly into my brainstem. Then, Thorne's voice cut through the blackness, a low, steady anchor in the chaos. "Nobody move. Jenkins, status on the generator." I could hear the frantic clicking of her maglite. A thin, wavering beam of light cut through the dark, playing over the walls, the desk, her own pale, terrified face. "The generator is still running," she said, her voice tight and strained. "I can hear it. The main breaker must have tripped. Or been tripped." The scratching sound at the door started again, louder this time, more insistent. Scrape, drag, scrape. It was a sound that crawled up the spine, a sound that spoke of a patient, mindless hunger. "It's outside," I whispered, the words feeling dry and useless in my mouth. "I have ears, Keegan," Thorne snapped, his own fear manifesting as anger. He was already moving, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. He had his sidearm out, a big Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum. The metallic click as he cocked the hammer was deafening in the charged silence. "Jenkins, get to the back. Barricade the rear entrance. Use the filing cabinets. Now." Jenkins, spurred into action by the direct order, scrambled towards the back room, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I drew my own weapon, a standard-issue Browning high power. It felt small and inadequate in my trembling hands. What were we going to do? Shoot a sound? Fire bullets at a sensory phenomenon? The absurdity of it was almost as terrifying as the scratching itself. The scratching stopped. A new, heavier sound replaced it, a dull, rhythmic thudding against the front door. Thud. Pause. Thud. It wasn't the sound of a fist or a shoulder. It was heavier, denser, like someone was methodically swinging a frozen log against the door, testing its strength. The entire door frame shuddered with each impact. Thorn and I took up positions on either side of the entrance, our weapons trained on the shaking wood. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Things like this belonged in my files, in the third-hand accounts of hysterical witnesses, not in my reality. This was a physical assault. The entity, the Wintermute, had graduated from psychological games to brute force. "Sir," Jenkins called from the back, her voice echoing. "The rear door is blocked. But the window in the holding cell? It's broken." "What?" Thorn yelled back, never taking his eyes off the shuddering front door. "The glass is broken. From the outside, there's snow on the floor inside the cell. It was flanking us. While we were focused on the noise at the front, it had created another point of entry at the back. It was intelligent, tactical. My blood ran cold. We were trapped between two fronts. The thudding at the front door stopped, and the silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. The buzzing was still there, a constant high-frequency drill in our skulls, but the immediate physical threat had vanished. "What's it doing?" I breathed, my eyes glued to the door. "Falling back," Thorn muttered, trying to draw us out. "It's toying with us." "And then," Jenkins screamed. It wasn't a gasp or a cry of fear. It was a full-throated, raw, animal scream of pure agony and terror that came from the back of the building. Thorn and I didn't hesitate. We spun and ran towards the source of the sound, our flashlights cutting erratic paths through the darkness. We found her in the short hallway leading to the holding cells. She was on the ground, writhing, clutching at her head. Her own flashlight lay on the floor beside her, its beam pointed at the ceiling, casting the scene in a grotesque, shifting light. "Jenkins. Sarah. What is it? Are you hurt?" Thorn knelt beside her, trying to grab her thrashing shoulders. "It's in my head!" she shrieked, her eyes wide with a madness I'd only ever seen in photographs from old asylum case studies. "It's in my head! I can't feel my hands! I can't feel my hands!" She held up her own hands in front of her face, staring at them as if they were alien objects. "They're not mine. They feel like static, like television static." Her screams dissolved into hysterical sobbing. The sensory deprivation had hit her, but not in the slow, creeping way it had affected me. It had slammed into her with the force of a psychic sledgehammer, a full-scale neurological assault that had shattered her perception of her own body. I pointed my flashlight towards the open door of the holding cell. The window, a small barred rectangle high on the wall, was shattered, and a small drift of snow had blown in. But there was something else. On the grimy wall of the cell, a word was scrawled. It was written in the frost that coated the concrete, as if traced by an impossibly cold finger. The word was leave. It wasn't a request, it was a command, a territorial display. It had broken in, attacked Jenkins's mind, and left us a message. It was demonstrating its power, showing us how easily it could destroy us. Thorn saw the writing on the wall. The cold, hard pragmatist in him took over. His own fear was locked away behind a mask of pure, mission-oriented focus. "She's compromised," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he looked down at the sobbing form of Agent Jenkins. "Her psychological state is a liability. We're a 3-man team down to 2 effective members. The mission parameters have changed. This is no longer an investigation. It is a survival and exfiltration scenario. What about her? I asked, my voice choked with horror at his clinical assessment. We can't just leave her. She's a casualty of the operating environment, Keegan, Thorne said, his voice like ice. My first priority is the integrity of the mission and the retrieval of viable intelligence. The intelligence is in that journal. Our survival is secondary, and her comfort is not even on the list. He grabbed Jenkins by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. She was barely coherent, muttering about the static in her bones. We're leaving. Now. Back to the car. We take the journal, and we get the hell out of this valley. But it was too late. As Thorne tried to drag the semi-catatonic Jenkins towards the front of the office, she suddenly broke free from his grasp with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. Her eyes were wild. "No!" she screamed. "I have to get it out! I have to get it out of my head!" Before either of us could react, she turned and bolted. Not towards the exit, but deeper into the building, towards the barricaded back door. She threw herself at the heavy filing cabinets, clawing at them, trying to get out into the freezing night. It's too loud in here. The buzzing. I need the quiet. "Jenkins, no!" I yelled, lunging after her. She was scrabbling at the back door, her fingers bloodying on the cold metal. With a final desperate heave, she managed to shift one of the cabinets just enough to squeeze through. She threw the door open and ran out into the blizzard that had started to rage outside, into the swirling chaos of snow and darkness. She was wearing only her uniform, without her parka, without her gloves or hat. "Damn it!" Thorne roared. He ran to the open door and stared out into the blackness. The wind howled, and the snow was a blinding, horizontal curtain. She was gone, swallowed by the storm in seconds. "She's lost," Thorne said, his voice a low, ragged growl of fury and defeat. "The cold will take her in minutes. We can't go after her. It's suicide." He slammed the door shut, the sound a final, terrible punctuation mark on the loss of our colleague. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his face pale in the bouncing glare of our flashlights. The invincible, unshakable SAC Thorne was gone. In his place was a man who had just lost one of his own. A man who had made a brutal, pragmatic choice and would have to live with it. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He walked over to the desk, grabbed Dr. Finch's journal, and shoved it into the inside pocket of his parka. Then he pulled the small military-grade satellite phone from his belt. It was our last hope, our only link to the outside world. He keyed the encryption sequence and held it to his ear. "This is Special Agent in Charge Marcus Thorne, ID 737, he said, his voice a low, urgent monotone. "I am declaring a full containment failure at location designation Silver Creek. Do you copy?" A burst of static was the only reply. He tried again. "This is Thorne. Project Wintermute is a catastrophic success. The phenomenon is active, intelligent, and hostile. We have sustained one casualty. Agent Jenkins is lost. I repeat, Agent Jenkins is KIA. The primary agent is neurological and sensory. We are compromised. I am invoking Emergency Protocol Citadel. I am requesting immediate, forced evacuation of all personnel and the implementation of a full, permanent quarantine of the entire valley. Level 5. No entry, no exit. Do you copy me? Damn it, do you copy?" He stared at the small phone in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief. "Nothing," he whispered. "The signal is gone. It's just like Jenkins said. It's gone." He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw pure, undiluted fear in his eyes. We were alone. No backup. No evac. No way out. The monster had cut the phone lines, and now it had cut us off from the heavens themselves. We were utterly, completely on our own, trapped in a frozen hell with a dead radio and the ghost of a screaming woman in our ears. The point of no return had passed, and we hadn't even seen it go by. In the aftermath of Jenkins's loss and the failure of the sat phone, a new kind of silence descended upon the sheriff's office. It was a silence born of shock and the chilling realization of our own mortality. The defiant roar of the generator outside felt mocking, a useless expenditure of energy in a situation that had moved far beyond mechanical solutions. We were two men, armed with firearms that were little more than talismans against a foe that fought with silence and sensation. Thorne, for his part, retreated into a shell of cold fury. The mask of the implacable SAC had been shattered, and what was left was a raw, wounded anger. He paced the small office like a caged animal, his boots thudding a heavy, rhythmic beat of frustration on the floorboards. "It played us," he growled, more to himself than to me. "It used her as a distraction. It herded her, panicked her, drove her out into the storm to die. It wanted to reduce our numbers. It's thinning the herd." My own fear was a different flavor. It was a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in my bones. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the progression from a strange case file to this waking nightmare. The buzzing, the loss of taste, the phantom whispers of my past failures, the creature of smoke in the street, Jenkins's screaming. It was a systematic dismantling of our reality, our sanity. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that it was not done with us. We were the last two lights burning in a valley of darkness, and it would not rest until we were extinguished. "Thorne," I said, my voice hoarse. "Finch's journal?" He mentioned the mine, the Blackwood Consolidated Mine. He said the Omni-Geo team was drilling on the ridge above it. He said that's where the Wintermute signal was coming from. Thorne stopped pacing. He turned to look at me, his face grim in the wavering flashlight beams. "What's your point, Keegan?" "My point is, we're not getting out of this valley. The road is snowed in. Our comms are dead. We can't call for help. And even if we could, they wouldn't get here in time. We have two choices. We can sit here and wait for it to break down the door and pick us apart, one by one. Or we can go to the source. We can go to the mine." He stared at me. His eyes narrowed. "A suicide mission." "It's all a suicide mission now," I countered, a strange, fatalistic calm settling over me. "The difference is, this way we might get an answer. We might find the on switch, or at least an off switch. We have C4 in the trunk of the car. Standard emergency kit, enough to collapse a mine entrance. If we can't stop the signal, maybe we can at least bury it. Bury it so deep that no one ever stumbles upon it again." Thorne was silent for a long moment. The only sounds the howl of the wind outside and the incessant, maddening buzz in our heads. He was weighing the options, the pragmatist in him warring with the instinct for survival. To stay was to die a slow, cold, maddening death. To go was to almost certainly die a quicker one, but on our own terms, fighting back. He walked over to the desk and picked up Dr. Finch's journal, holding it as if it were a holy relic. "He tried to warn them," Thorne said softly. "The doctor. He tried to tell the world, and nobody listened." He closed the journal and tucked it securely back inside his parka. He looked at me, and a flicker of the old resolute Thorne was back in his eyes. "All right, Keegan. You want to go see the devil in his house? Let's go. We'll give them something to put in their damn report." The decision made, a grim sense of purpose settled over us. This was it, the final desperate act. We spent the next hour preparing, a methodical ritual that kept the terror at bay. We went out to the car, the wind and snow a physical assault, and retrieved the small, heavy case containing the C4 plastic explosives, the blasting caps, and the timers. We loaded our pockets with extra magazines for our pistols. We filled our thermoses with the tasteless hot water from our supplies, not for pleasure, but for the life-sustaining warmth. Every action was deliberate, focused. We were two soldiers gearing up for a final battle. The Blackwood mine was on the far side of town, up a steep, winding access road. The journey on foot was a brutal ordeal. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the wind was a relentless physical force that tore at our clothes and stole the air from our lungs. The buzzing grew louder with every step we took towards the mountain, the frequency climbing higher, becoming a piercing, painful shriek that vibrated in our skulls. The town itself was a gallery of horrors. We passed houses with doors hanging open, their interiors dark and frozen. Through one window, I saw a family sitting around a dinner table, a full Thanksgiving-style feast laid out before them, all of it covered in a thick layer of frost. They were frozen solid in their chairs, forks halfway to their mouths, forever trapped in the memory of a meal they could not taste. The entrance to the mine was a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain, a black wound in the white landscape. The wooden support beams were old and rotting, and a rusty, iron-gated door hung ajar, swinging back and forth in the wind with a mournful, rhythmic screech. The air that flowed out of the mine was colder than the surrounding winter, a deep, ancient cold that felt like it was coming from the heart of the earth. And the buzzing, here, at the threshold, it was a physical force, a wall of sound that made my vision swim and my stomach churn. "This is it!" Thorn yelled over the noise, his voice tinny and distant. "Ready?" I just nodded, unable to speak. We switched on our headlamps, their powerful beams cutting into the absolute blackness of the mine shaft. We stepped across the threshold, and the world outside vanished. The howling of the wind was gone, replaced by the overwhelming claustrophobic roar of the buzz. We were inside the beast. The mine shaft descended at a steep angle, the floor slick with ice. The beams of our headlamps revealed a narrow, dripping tunnel held up by decaying wooden supports. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, rock dust, and something else. A faint, metallic, ozone-like smell, like the air after a lightning strike. We moved slowly, cautiously, our weapons held at the ready. The buzzing seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, resonating in the rock around us, making it impossible to pinpoint a direction. But it was getting stronger, more intense, the deeper we went. After what felt like an eternity of descent, the main shaft opened into a large, cavernous chamber. It was a natural cave that had been expanded by the miners, the walls a chaotic jumble of rock and old, abandoned equipment. Rusty mine carts lay on their sides, their wheels seized with corrosion. Wooden crates, their contents long since rotted away, were stacked against the walls. And in the center of the cavern, the tunnel continued downwards. A smaller, reinforced shaft that looked newer than the rest of the mine. It was a borehole, lined with concrete and steel. This was the work of the Omni-Geo team. This was their descent into the heart of the anomaly. A steel ladder was bolted to the side of the borehole, disappearing into the darkness below. "Down there," Thorn said, his voice tight. "It has to be." He started down the ladder without another word. I followed, the cold metal of the rungs biting into my gloves. The descent was terrifying. My headlamp beam could only penetrate a few feet into the oppressive blackness, giving me the vertiginous sensation of lowering myself into an infinite bottomless pit. The buzzing intensified with every rung I descended, the pitch rising until it was a single, pure, agonizing note that seemed to be vibrating my very bones apart. I could feel the pressure building in my ears, in my sinuses. My vision began to tunnel. I don't know how far we descended. 100 feet? 200? It felt like miles. Then Thorn, who was below me, stopped. "Keegan!" he called up, his voice strained. "You need to see this." I climbed down the last few rungs and my feet touched solid ground. I was standing in a small, perfectly circular chamber at the bottom of the borehole. The walls weren't rock. They were smooth, cool, and black, like polished obsidian. And they weren't man-made. They pulsed with a faint internal light, a network of soft, blue-white veins that throbbed in time with a deafening buzz. We were no longer in a mine. We had descended into something else. Something biological, or geological, or something for which we had no words. And in the center of the chamber was the source. It was not a machine. It was not a creature. It was a crystal. A single massive crystalline structure, 10 feet tall, that grew up from the floor of the chamber. It was a chaotic lattice of impossible angles and non-Euclidean geometry, its facets shifting and rearranging themselves as I watched. It glowed with a cold, blue-white light, the source of the pulsing veins in the walls. And it was the epicenter of the buzz, the sound pouring off it in visible waves of distorted air. This was Wintermute, an alien geological formation, a trans-dimensional entity, a god sleeping in the heart of the mountain. It didn't matter. It was real, and it was the thing that had destroyed Silver Creek. As we stood there, mesmerized by the impossible sight, the sensory deprivation hit its final, terrifying stage. The buzzing cut out. Abruptly. The sudden total silence was more shocking than the noise had been, and with the silence my other senses winked out. I could no longer feel the pressure of my boots on the floor. I couldn't feel the weight of the pack on my back. I couldn't feel the cold metal of the pistol in my hand, even though I was staring right at it. My body had become a numb, disconnected vessel. I was a ghost in my own skin. I saw Thorne stumble. He reached out a hand to steady himself against the wall, but he couldn't feel it. A look of pure, unadulterated terror crossed his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was trying to scream into a void. He fell to his knees, his body convulsing, his eyes wide and staring at the pulsing crystal. He was having a stroke, or a seizure, his brain unable to cope with the complete and total sensory shutdown. He collapsed onto the floor, motionless. He was gone. I was alone. Alone with the silent, screaming crystal. I knew I only had seconds before my own mind collapsed. My training, my sense of mission, the last vestiges of Frank Keegan, the FBI agent, took over. I fumbled with the pack on my back, my numb, useless fingers barely able to work the clasps. I pulled out the blocks of C4. I couldn't feel them, but I could see them. I jammed the blasting caps into the soft, pliable explosive. I set the timer. My movements were clumsy, robotic. I was working on pure muscle memory. I set the timer for 2 minutes. I placed the charges at the base of the crystal, my hands passing through the visible waves of distortion that emanated from it. I activated the timer. A small, red light began to blink. 2 minutes. I turned away from the crystal, from the body of my commander, and I started to climb. My limbs were numb, disconnected appendages that I commanded with pure will. I couldn't feel the rungs of the ladder, but I could see them. I pulled my useless body upwards, rung by rung, escaping the silent, screaming chamber. I climbed out of the borehole into the main cavern. I didn't look back. I scrambled up the main mine shaft towards the distant, pale rectangle of light that was the entrance. I burst out of the mine, falling into the snow, gasping for air that I couldn't feel entering my lungs. The world was a silent movie. I could see the snow falling. I could see the trees swaying in the wind, but I could hear nothing. I was deaf. I was numb. I was utterly, profoundly alone in a universe without sensation. I pushed myself to my feet, and I ran, stumbling away from the mine, away from the mountain. I didn't know if the blast would be enough. I didn't know if burying it would stop it, but it was all I could do. It was my last defiant act. I was maybe 100 yards away when the world behind me turned white. There was no sound, no roar, no explosion. Just a silent, all-encompassing flash of pure, white light that bleached the landscape of all color. A wave of force, which I couldn't feel but could see as it ripped trees from the ground, threw me forward, and the world dissolved into silent, senseless darkness. Consciousness returned, not as a gentle awakening, but as a violent, painful intrusion. The first thing I felt was pain, a searing, blinding pain in my head, my ribs, my legs, and I rejoiced. Pain was a sensation. It meant I was back. The second thing I heard was a sound, the steady, rhythmic beeping of a machine, a heart monitor. I forced my eyes open. The world was a white, blurry haze. I was in a bed, covered by a stiff, sterile sheet. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. I was in a hospital. A figure swam into focus beside my bed. A man in a crisp, dark suit. He was not a doctor. His face was bland, forgettable, the kind of face that is designed not to be remembered. Behind him stood another man, identical in his blandness. The men in black. The cleaners. The ones who come after the monsters have gone home. "Agent Keegan," the first man said, his voice a low, even monotone. "I'm glad to see you're back with us. You've had quite an ordeal." My own voice was a dry, rasping crackle. "Thorne Jenkins?" The man's expression didn't change. "Special Agent in Charge Thorne and Agent Jenkins will be posthumously awarded the FBI Medal of Valor for their heroic actions during the sudden and tragic geological event at Silver Creek. A massive, previously undetected pocket of methane gas trapped beneath the old mine ignited. The resulting explosion and subsequent rock slides were responsible for the tragic loss of the entire town. A terrible, unavoidable natural disaster." He said the words like he was reading a weather report. The official story. Neat. Tidy. A lie so complete it was almost a work of art. "What about the crystal?" I rasped. "The signal?" "You were found unconscious at the edge of the blast radius by a National Guard search and rescue team," the man continued, ignoring my question completely. "You were suffering from severe concussion, multiple fractures, and acute hypothermia. A miracle you survived. Your report, when you are well enough to file it, will reflect this version of events. It will state that you and your team were caught in the initial explosion while attempting to evacuate the residents. Is that understood, Agent Keegan?" The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air, as cold and heavy as the silence in the mine. "And if I don't?" The man smiled, a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. "Then your file, along with your medical records, will reflect that you succumbed to the same mass hysteria that afflicted the townspeople. That you murdered your fellow agents in a paranoid delusion before wandering out into the wilderness. Your pension will be forfeit. Your name will be a disgrace. Your sacrifice will have meant nothing." He leaned closer. "Project Wintermute never happened. Silver Creek was a tragedy. You are a hero who was lucky to survive. You will be given a new name, a new life, a generous medical retirement. You will move to a quiet town in a warm state, and you will forget any of this ever happened. You will learn to live with the silence." And so I did. For 40 years, I took their name. I took their money. I moved to a small, sun-bleached town in Arizona where the cold is just a memory. I learned to live with the ghosts. The ghost of Sarah Jenkins, screaming about the static in her hands. The ghost of Marcus Thorne, a good soldier, collapsing in a silent, screaming void. The ghosts of 612 people who forgot the feeling of warmth. I learned to live with the scars. The faint, high-frequency tinnitus in my right ear. The way food sometimes on bad days still tastes like nothing. the irrational fear I have of a quiet room. But I never forgot. You can't forget something like that. You can only bury it. But secrets don't stay buried forever, especially not secrets that powerful. They leak. They echo. That's why I'm making this tape. Because I know what the unexplained geological tremors in a remote part of Utah really are. I know what the mass hysteria event in a Canadian Arctic research station truly means. The pattern is starting again. They didn't destroy it. I just buried it. I just rang the dinner bell and ran away. And it's been digging its way out ever since. They gave me a new name, a new life, and told me to forget. But I can't. Because sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the air is still, I can still hear the static, and I know it's still listening. So, that's the story of Project Wintermute. A story that officially never happened. About a town that was erased from the map by a convenient mine gas leak. It's a story about how the ambition to dig deeper, to uncover secrets buried in the earth, unleashed a horror that attacked the very senses we use to perceive reality. Officially, the threat was contained in 1983. But you and I, we've heard the testimony. We know the truth now. They didn't stop it. They just put a mountain on top of it and walked away, hoping no one would ever listen for the buzzing again. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story made you think or look over your shoulder, support the channel with a like and subscribe. And be sure to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Until next time, be careful what you listen for in the quiet places. Sometimes the silence isn't empty. It's just waiting for you to notice it.